what better place to start our day than Bushong, Kansas? I have been requested to come here many times. I came here years ago. I was just passing through, but I didn't actually come to the town. I did a video about water towers, and they have a cool little water tower out by the main road, but I didn't come back to the town, come down through the roads to the town, which is just off the main road. And I wish I did, because man, it is fantastic. It's I guess what you would consider like a living ghost town, because it's still an incorporated town. Technically there's 27 people that were here at the last population. Had as many as 200, 250 over 100 years ago, and it has gone down to 27, and one of the smallest incorporated towns in Kansas. I did a video years ago about the 10 smallest towns in Kansas, and this just barely missed the list, and who knows, it might be on there someday, kind of the way things are going. But it's a really great place to visit. But Bushong was started, kind of this community was in the 1870s, 1880s. It was actually called Weeks. There was a guy, his last name was Weeks, and so they basically started the community. And then in 1886, when the railroad was coming through, the railroad decided to change the name. The St. Louis Browns had won the World Series in 1886, and they were coming up with names for the railroad and different depots along the way, so they started naming them after baseball players of the St. Louis Browns. And Bushong was a catcher for the Browns, and he got a town named after him. And this is actually the only town that still has the name of one of those baseball players. There were several at the time, and this was the only one still remaining as a town. So Bushong has that going for itself. Grew a couple hundred people, and depression was, hurt a lot of these towns out here. And then in the 50s, the schools consolidated, and the railroad depot closed in 1957. So, those kind of things are pretty typical stories out in these parts. And what is left is really remarkable. You can kind of see how the town, some of the town's still here, but you can see kind of how the town was laid out here in the main area. There's a bank on the corner, and it's a really nicely kept bank for one that has fallen apart. I'm assuming they've kind of tried to keep it standing. There's a garage, there's some other buildings. I'm sitting in this really awesome memorial. There's a couple of them. This is kind of the local one for the town of Bushong. It talked about in World War II, where the population of the town was 134, and 10 residents passed away here, and they have all their pictures here, and how per capita that was the highest in Kansas and possibly one of the highest in the entire United States. Almost 10% of their population was killed in the war, even though 134, 10 of that, 10 is a significant number, especially for a town so small. And then they have one more for the county, kind of just across the way. Also, you can see kind of where the sidewalks go. You can see where the town, how the different sidewalks would have been in the town. And then the school is way over across the way. And it's a big school when you think about how small the town is, but the school is impressive, and it's crumbling, but still awesome to see all this history of little old Bushong, Kansas. bit windy out here as we stop in Canada, Kansas. And how did it get that name? Well, there was a Speaker of the Senate of Canada who sent his son down to this area to buy some land. And then some Canadian immigrants came down to this area and they named it Canada. So I'm walking around the cemetery, definitely some headstones from back in the 1880s and then beyond. It's kind of when it got settled. Railroad came through, and then but you know, it was never a real big town. It never incorporated, and then railroad was abandoned about 30-40 years ago. Had a post office for 70 years, from 1884 to 1954. When you go down and check it out now, there's not a ton of old abandoned buildings, but there is a little community there. There's some houses, a couple things to look at. The cemetery is probably the most historical thing to look at here in Canada. In 1887, Marion County purchased 160 acres of land from a nearby settler to build a poor farm. The large stone structure was called the Marion County Poor Asylum. Indigent and, quote, incompetent people could live there with adult supervision, work the land, and raise their food. Unwed pregnant girls could also stay here until they delivered their babies, which were put up for adoption through the county health department. During World War II, the poor farm utilized Germans in the German prison camp in Peabody to help during the harvest. In 1950, $34,000 was spent to enlarge the building and add new equipment. The name was changed to Cedar Rest to remove the stigma of the Poor Asylum, and it was named for the attractive cedars around the place. It was used until 1964 and then turned into a lodge and restaurant and is now on the Register of Historic Places. And then just down the dirt road is the cemetery for Poor Farm. Kind of a interesting place to visit. There's names on them, but there's not really much in the way of dates, and sometimes not even actually full names. Might be just like a short word or two to describe who they were. And so I'd say this is a historic place, very small. As you can see, that's the entire cemetery, and then over here in the far back left corner is a unique one. A lot of times I end up visiting towns and I don't know how to pronounce the name. And I pulled up to this one, had no idea, and what I was guessing turned out to be way off. Fortunately, someone who grew up and lives here saw me and came over and said it's pronounced Aulne, A-U-L-N-E, Aulne. And it's kind of interesting, and it has some really interesting buildings here to look at. Originally it was called Sherburne. There was a guy with that last name that settled in this area, worked for the railroad, and then in the 1880s, I think there was a change in maybe what railroad came through here, and there was someone else that worked for the railroad named Aulne for the new railroad, which you can hear the railroad's still active through here. And so it was started as a town, had a post office for a good 60 or 70 years, and has a couple of old buildings left. I'm right here by the bank, built in 1909. So that's a pretty interesting structure. And then as the train's going to be rolling by here, we're just near the railroad tracks, obviously, why the town was built. And right over there's an old church, over 100 years old, and still gets some use to this day, I was told. So the guy who lived here Also said that, you can see kind of the foundations here on this side street, or on this main street on the side, and he said there were lots of buildings through this area, and he can remember, being a service station and just kind of everything that a town has. Also, it was one of the final sites that was going to be where Hillsborough, or actually Tabor College was going to end up being in Hillsborough, Kansas. So this could have been home to a nice university, and who knows what would have happened if that was the case. I'm sure it would look a lot different than it does now. Pretty interesting little stop here. It's definitely out some dirt roads. I'm sure being so far from any kind of major city or even a town hardly was a big reason why it didn't survive longer than it did. But cool to see a couple old buildings still here in Aulne, Kansas. Thanks for watching this video about Kansas ghost towns. If you like this video, there are several ways to support the channel. You can donate by hitting the thanks button under the video or purchase Travel with a Wiseguy merchandise. In the description of the video is a link to my website where you can learn more about the channel and sign up for my newsletter. And if you aren't interested in any of that, I'm just happy you took a few minutes out of your day to watch this video and learn a little about the history of these interesting, forgotten places. But there's a church right over here, and over 100 years old.